Hello, everybody. A lot of same faces, some new ones. Awesome. Hey, for the folks that didn't just have me, it should make you feel good that the people that did just have me showed back up for this class, right? So I got that going for me. Um, so everybody's like, yeah, but I mean, psychopathology, dude. It's a big word. Um, has anybody told like family or friends that the name of your class that you're taking?
I have.
Yeah. What's their response usually when you say that?
When you say psychopathology, they're quite
Oh.
impressed.
Yes.
My my in-laws always ask, or before they would ask like, what I was studying. And then when they first found out, they were just like they go from like being like very extroverted and warm, like so it was like they're like holding their breath. It's like, no way, I'm not analyzing you. Not couldn't even do it yet technically anyway. I was when I was in grad school. Yeah. But I've been analyzing those everybody since I was a little kid. Bet you have too. Yeah. I just have words for it now. We call it psychopathology.
Good
Yeah.
word.
I once said that at a had to go to some sort of party. It's always like I had to go to a party. Had to go to some sort of party thing, and it wasn't a psychology party. And I hate when people ask me like, "So what do you do?" Well, I usually just go psychopathology, and it's just like shuts the conversation down. There, all everybody was having fun. Everybody's just enjoying themselves, and then you like, oh, I am a psychologist or I'm a counselor. There's like, neat, okay, and it gets real quiet, and they kind of slowly walk away from the group. Like 5 minutes later, it's like, why, where'd everybody go?
I would
Yeah,
think they would beeline for answers to their deepest conflicts and questions.
you know, um, in all honesty, it's not that bad, and I'm not trying to scare you as if that's like a real common thing. Um, Most of the time, I think people nowadays, when you tell them that, um, first of all, they're going to think that you prescribe. Okay. So you're going to be like, I'm a counselor. They're going to be like, oh, okay. So, like, prescribe medicine or that you went to med school, and they're going to call you doctor, whether you're a doctor or not. When I was when I was getting my doctorate, um, I had a patient once that I was, he kept calling me Dr. Armstrong, and I wasn't a doctor. I was like, just to let you know, man, I'm not telling you what you have to call me. You can call me whatever, I guess, but I'm not a doctor yet. He's like, all right, I'm just going to call you doctor though, because that's easier for me to remember. I was like, oh, okay. I always thought that was funny. Like, I never thought about it. I guess I can just pick out a name for my counselor. I'm going to call you Weird Hat. Okay. Person with a weird hat. Yeah. Um, so I do have my son with me, at least for the next 10, 15 minutes or so. My daughter got into a acting play. She applied. She tried out Saturday morning. We found out Saturday afternoon she made it, and then also found out she had her first practice tonight. Tried to scramble for kid coverage, and uh, that's kind of, as y'all probably know, it's really hard to do on like, hey, what are you doing the next 15 minutes? It's like nobody out there can be there. But he's real cool. He's a lot smarter than I am, and um, hopefully his Bluetooth headphones continue to work. We're having some
Tell them
issues.
hi for us. Tell them hello for us.
Oh yeah, he's being quiet. There's no way in the world am I disturbing that quietness right now.
Okay.
Are you kidding me? Are you offering babysitting?
I,
Is that what
I
you're?
love to see
That's
them.
what I heard
I
you
love
ask.
kids. I
Can,
love
can you
kids.
babysit? I'm just kidding. No, this time of night, I love like this is like dad time because the wheels start coming off the kids, and just like everything's funny. Like I don't even have to try anymore. And I'm valid. Like I feel so affirmed at this time of night because my kids laugh a lot. But good grief, if we decide we're not brushing our teeth, we can turn on a dime. We go from laughing to not laughing. very quick.
Correct.
Yeah. Well, like I told other classes, tonight is this time. I really want to devote to you guys asking questions related to the topics that we covered the week before. And tonight will be the first time we do that. I recognize that it's 8:30, and you all had a full day. I'm sure that's not the first thing you did today. With that said, though, if we run out of questions, especially for tonight, there's a few concepts related to ADHD in adults that I would be very happy to go over because it's fresh, because I just presented on it a few days ago at a mini conference. I've never been to a mini conference, but it was a mini conference. And I asked him, I was like, why not invite me to like your big conference? Like, am I just like a mini lecture, like a mini guest? I'm friends with them, so I could ask them that kind of stuff. They didn't think, or at least not all of them didn't think I was weird. But I do have some research from that I would be happy to share with you when we get to that point. It sounds like my wife just got home and my dogs are going bananas. Y'all give me like 2 seconds. I promise you they're okay. That's Leroy, my dog.
Hey, I have a question for anyone who happens to be a subscriber to the New York Times. Did anybody get an opportunity to glance at that? Because it was behind a paywall, the New York Times article. Anybody know?
I have Apple News and I think I can get it. And if I can send screenshots to this group. Let me try.
Oh, okay.
I just tried it on my computer and I couldn't see it, but I hadn't tried it on my phone yet.
I think I just got the title and I was like, wow, that sounds interesting. And nothing else. Thank you.
My brother's a political science professor and he requires everyone in his class to get the New York Times. But I haven't told him that I have not subscribed myself, his own sister. But I wish I did have it so I could have read that article. So I'd appreciated it. Emily, if you do have access, that'd be great. Thanks.
I have thought about getting New York Times so many times, and honestly, mostly for the puzzles, because they have like the Wordle and all those things.
Yeah, it's funny that you said that. I took political science as an undergrad a million years ago, and we had to have it for that. And that's what I did with it, the puzzles. I don't think I really ever read the articles very often. I just kind of skim them, but
Great crossword puzzles. So good.
yeah, they did have great, great cross puzzles. Oh, it's always funny. What's the article called?
It's new study cast out on adult ADHD or something like that.
What was the first thing you said? Near what?
We are trying to get to the New York Times article.
Okay.
Yes, and so we were just wondering, we were asking if anyone has a New York Times subscription. So,
Oh, did I post something that Jetta have a subscription for to get into?
yes, but
I'm very sorry.
Yeah.
Let's. I did not know that was the case. because usually I just post PDF stuff.
I was just curious about, I was asking if anybody was like had New York Times or was able to get to it because it was, yeah, I was just curious what it said.
Oh yeah, I'm so sorry, guys. I didn't do that whenever, but like it's been a few months.
They've added a lot of paywalls recently, so things I used to be able to see, I can't see anymore.
I think there used to be like a trick for getting around it, but I don't think it's real ethical, so I'm not going to figure that out. But
It's apparently a big topic this week. There's
officially,
a ton of articles just in the last 7 or 8 days. When you go to Apple News, if you type in ADHD, it just is like,
it has been and continues to be very much a buzzword that all the people that don't really believe in it are starting to get mad about. And just politically in general, the whole world is just getting mad, and big pharma is whoever's making, like, I don't know where all that money goes, but there are some yachts being purchased. There are some plots of land the size of like private islands being purchased out there by somebody who's making a bunch of money, I'm telling you, through like big pharma and this whole like Adderall shortage and all that stuff. Yeah.
Hmm.
The government's scrambling to try to contain to save, I would say, save face, at least to pretend like they care on that front, as if methamphetamine doesn't exist, by the way, which I'm telling you, it's a lot easier to get meth these days than it is to get Adderall prescribed to you than actually have a pharmacy that has it. But not that I have any idea how hard it is to get meth. I don't do meth. Who knows? Don't write in the comments, guys. Don't give me feedback. This semester, Dr. Armstrong does meth. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that the whole country and the FDA and the DEA are manufacturing a lot. Like it's almost like a negative reinforcement. They're making a big deal about a bunch of stuff that is only making it worse. Yeah. It's like you're trying to put out a fire with more fires without it having a plan. Because I know they technically do that sometimes, but that's not the type of firefighting I'm talking about. Good grief, what are we talking about, folks? Firefighting. Here we go. I need, if you're open to it, I would like to spend 15 minutes here walking through some big concepts for ADHD. Before I do that, I don't want to pass over any questions that anybody has, but I also want to make sure that you get this information before I have to wrap this up so that I can tuck my kids in. Okay. This won't be I promise it won't be every Monday night. Today was a particularly hard day where I saw my son behind me. That was this evening, and I haven't seen my daughter yet all day, except for whenever I dropped her off at school. Yeah, been one of those busy days. So, does that sound good to you? Okay.
yeah.
Before I do that, what questions y'all have?
How old are your kids again?
9-year-old going on like 16, and my 6-year-old going on 26.
And what's the show?
Brady Bunch.
Brady Bunch?
What's the show?
What's the show that your daughter's in?
Oh, here in Wiley, it is the Christmas a Christmas Carol. Yeah.
Oh, that'll be fun.
Mm-hmm. Except we're singing Christmas songs right now, people. It's too early, but we're gonna practice them anyway, I guess.
I disagree. Never too early.
That's true. I really could do Christmas year round in concept, but I don't want to drive back and forth to family members' houses year round. Take that out of the equation, and I'll do it. Yeah. Or go shopping. Everybody's angry too during Christmas. Like, the way to ruin Christmas is go to like shopping for Christmas around Christmas.
I have a question about ADHD.
Uh-huh. Please.
So females in ADHD, as a teacher and as a mother of two boys, one with ADHD, I've not encountered that many females with ADHD, although sometimes I think I might have ADHD. But do you see a lot of female?
The vast majority of my adult onset question referrals are female.
Oh, really? Okay.
And I would make the argument you don't see the stereotypical concept of ADHD in the adult females. So you don't see that, is why you don't see it. Mm-hmm. What you do see, and you probably have seen, is a whole lot of women getting diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder.
Yes.
Getting misdiagnosed a lot of times. Not saying all the time, but that's a big one. Because even if they go in there to talk with their doctor, who's usually a dude, by the way, it's always a male. It's unfortunate. When they bring up any like mental symptom, I'm telling you, if you ever want to get a quick diagnosis for generalized anxiety disorder, as a female, just go talk to your family doc about anything. Like, I have trouble paying attention. Well, it's got to be generalized anxiety disorder. Have trouble, planning or prioritizing. Well, it's got to be generalized anxiety. It's always anxiety. I'm not a feminist. Maybe I am. I don't know if I don't walk around and be like, hello, I'm Dr. Armstrong, I'm a feminist. But I support that because it's frustrating to see the patients that women will go years with misdiagnoses from a generation of doctors that were trained that every symptom that a woman has is anxiety.
Yeah, thank you. I was wondering, because I know it even talks in the book about it's more male than female, but I wondered what you saw in your.
There's a bunch of dudes that came up with that research too.
Yeah.
It
All
was.
right. Thank you.
Yep. That's a great question.
I think the reason that you see a lot of women that come in with that is because when we were kids and we were in school, we were just considered overly talkative. It was like, oh, they just talk too much. Because at least when I was little, that was something boys got, girls didn't have that.
So the hyperactivity and impulsive subtype with ADHD in girls looks like that, talking too much. The inattentive type tend to sit towards the back, are super quiet, very obedient, and kind of just get missed. Like nobody ever knows much about them.
Like a daydreamer, right? That's what
but usually high anxiety though too. Yeah. Not saying the talkers don't have anxiety, it's just that they deal with their anxiety by talking. The other girls deal with it by internalizing and kind of just being compliant.
I actually, in looking for the New York Times article, I found an article about women and ADHD.
Interesting. Well, I posted a whole bunch of resources on ADHD in women, particularly with PMDD, because those go hand in hand. I think it was in week 4 or 5. I can't remember where I posted it all. Y'all saw it, right?
I did not.
It's in there somewhere. Let's see. Yeah, it's week 5. There's 5 resources.
Yeah.
Reason why that's so important is because if you meet a woman with ADHD, confirmed ADHD, it's almost 100%. It's not 100%, but who knows exactly? We know it's really close. It's really high, probably all of them. At some point in their life, are gonna meet the diagnostic criteria for PMDD. And probably every single woman who's ever been diagnosed with PMDD has ADHD. Which came first? Which one's the egg? Which one's, which came first, the chicken or the egg? It's always the egg, which is ADHD. PMDD is to be honest with you, it would be the anticipated difficulties that most women would experience for 2 weeks out of the month. If they have ADHD, the difference is associated with ADHD and how it affects the brain uniquely. And probably 1/3 of women in general, because we know that genetically, the world population, 1/3 of the world population have the right genetic predisposition to develop, under the right amount of stress, to develop ADHD, OCD, autism, Tourette's and tics, schizophrenia, bipolar, and with that, depression. I'm not saying 1/3 of the world has those things. I'm saying there's the right genetic predisposition for all of that stuff because it's kind of all the same stuff from a brain, like where does it come from standpoint. And with the right environmental stressors, you combine that with that predisposition, and then all of a sudden you start meeting the arbitrary diagnostic criteria. And it is arbitrary, and I wish it weren't. I say arbitrary. It's not they just like willy-nilly made it up like last week. They've built on this stuff like over time, but the ADHD diagnosis began under the assumption that it is a discrete thing. And I have yet to meet anybody with just plain old ADHD, just vanilla ADHD. There's always something else. It might not be diagnosable, but we got a little bit more. Does that make sense? But the assumption from the get-go has not been questioned whether or not it is a discrete thing, which is why you get all kinds of complicated and convoluted and contradictory differential diagnosis sections. When you go in that section, they're like, well, you can have comorbid this, but you can't have comorbid this, but we don't tell you why, just because we say so. Do you see anywhere in there where they tell you why? No. Good luck finding that answer, because I bet they don't even know why. It's just because that's why we've always done it.
I
So-
thought it was interesting that basically you can't have anything if you're diagnosed with something else medically. That seems to be the case. It's like you can have it unless you're diagnosed with something else, and then you can't have it. You can have every symptom, but if you're diagnosed with something else, you can't have it.
And by separating those two, psychiatry gets to claim its own little world, as if the brain does not exist. We're in 2023. We've got like AI bots about to take over the world, and we're still trying to pretend like, gosh, a gastrointestinal, like stomach flu wouldn't cause depression or anxiety from a biological chemical standpoint, because it does. I promise you it does. Not in everybody, but in a lot of people it does, because there are more, we know this, we've known this for years. There are more serotonin receptors in your gut system than there are in your brain. And you can't just mess with like one system and not expect the whole system to respond. So if you mess with the receptors in your gut, you kill off a bunch of them because of the whatever it was. Guess what also happens? The receptors in your brain. Yeah, they decline too.
Leaky gut syndrome.
Not my only hesitation with that is I'm not saying it's not a real thing, because just because we can't measure something doesn't mean it doesn't exist, which is what medicine tries to like do a lot or smugly. They're like, Yeah, that's not that's not a real thing. I don't want to do that, but at the same time, there are several diagnoses out there, folks, that I'm telling you that have questionable science behind them, including that, including yeah, and it's not that they're not real. It's just that the symptoms end up being so general when you're talking about like fatigue, headache, feeling tired or feeling upset stomach. But those symptoms don't differentiate anything because it's like saying, well, and also breathing. If you breathe, that means you have it too. But see what I'm saying? That's not a very specific symptom. And so it ends up being an aggregate of random but very commonly occurring symptoms that get placed in different categories and different diagnoses or theoretical diagnoses or just things that I guess the internet makes up. And just have caution when you see that stuff, because people get very invested in those labels sometimes. And one, you don't want to ever be a gatekeeper for any, like, I never want to be a gatekeeper for like someone's meaning in life. But at the same time, if it's just wrong based on the science, I think that we've got an ethical duty to help them understand what it all means in a way that in a therapeutic way. If there's anybody can do it, we can, because that's what we're trained to do therapeutically. But they probably didn't start with you, and I bet they've had a few doctors along the way that tried to do that in a non-therapeutic manner, which only made them dig in deeper into some of those theories. Yeah. Just be careful though, because when your identity starts to get attached to it, or your self-identity starts to get attached to a diagnosis, then it's very difficult to lose. There's a grieving process to lose that identity. Does that make sense?
Do you kind of mean that a lot of this stuff is happening in the same areas of the brain and similar things are happening, but we are giving them labels based on what kind of characteristics we see the patient doing? Is that the labels that we're giving them, the brain doesn't differentiate, and they may all be part of the same problematic thing that's going on, just different affect that you show. Is that what you're kind of saying? Is that possible?
I think so. Like, in other words, well, I'll say this is that if imagine, what's the best way to describe this metaphor? Yeah, all of the diagnoses are alternate routes. So if you're like trying to drive somewhere, like on vacation, you're letting your GPS, if you ever, it gives you a warning. It's like, click now if you want to save 30 minutes. You're like, of course. And then if you're not fast enough, you're like, no. But there are alternate routes leading to the same place, fundamentally, or I'm sorry, that come from the same place. It's like a river system, basically. So that the real problem, or the root of the problem, is the same. It's the same underlying pathophysiology. It's just that along the way, there are micro differences that really aren't as important as the root is in relation to what causes it, but that do result in a difference in behaviors appear. And medicine has prioritized those little micro things to make it more complicated, rather than just going back to the root and saying like, okay, maybe we should question our concept of what the root is. Because as it turns out, like I said, 1/3 of the world population have the right genetic predisposition to develop all that stuff. And we are living in a world that I think everybody would agree is not perfect. Does anybody have a perfect world? If so, I would like to hang out soon. We just hang out. I want to know what a perfect world looks like. But we've also lived in a world that has become increasingly, well, just more causing a higher stress of a higher cortisol release in our body. We know that there's been an uptick in cortisol amount. I don't think anybody would argue with that either. And we know when those two things occur, when stress increases, that 1/3 of the population develop these symptoms, those neurodevelopmental things I was talking about. That's the root. But there's no medicine, unfortunately, to cure overworked, tired people getting underpaid. Right? Is anybody a teacher in here? Yeah. Like, yeah, she's like, absolutely right, Dr. Armstrong. Please tell my boss that. But that's and I'm not trying to say that there's no such thing as psychopathology. Yes, there is, because the dysfunction is what we care about. ADHD does exist. It's a real neurological disability, but it's not necessarily always the case that it's because that person has a dysfunctional brain, at least for about, gosh, I think it's like 30 to 40% of all cases of ADHD, those people have a high IQ. So their brain's not broken. We're living in a world that's designed for the other 2/3 of the population. That brings me to my next point real quick. And I'm sorry if it seems like I'm going a little bit swiftly, but I just want to make sure I get these. I want to make sure you guys get this information. So, gosh, where was I going? Somebody help remind me what was I literally just talking about? It's been a long day, people.
ADHD and the treatments for it. About how they're
Okay, yeah. High IQs. That's right. So this is the truth. When you look at it, fundamentally, 1/3 of the world population have the genes for delayed onset sleep circadian rhythm. I said this in my last class, and what that means is that instead of their brains releasing melatonin around 9 p.m., it doesn't happen until like 12 a.m., between 12 and 2. That's not a pathology. That just happens to be 1/3 of the world population, just genetically. Not increasing, not decreasing as far as we know over time. And it seems to be that you're born with that, and no matter what you want to do, you're stuck with it. Although, if you're in the other category, if you're a morning person, it's a little bit earlier. And then there's 1/3 of people that can just do whatever they want. I guess just those are all the movie stars and famous people just living the happy life, I guess. But if we only knew that as true, and I think science you can't prove anything, but that's as close as you can get that that's true. I'd want to know, okay, well, who are this unfortunate 1/3, the night owls? Because we sure don't live in a world that's designed around that. Would y'all agree? And let's zoom it way back to kiddos. They start school way too early, at least. And homework. That didn't make sense. So we've got 1/3 of the world population, at least in the Western cultures, being forced into a diurnal circadian pattern that goes against what their brain wants to biologically do. And so they're chronically sleepy and tired. At some point, they just learn to cope. Just pretend like, well, at some point what ends up happening, we just don't know any different. We're just like, it's not normal to feel tired all the time. But you would assume, and the easy way, the next leap there is that if that's the only thing we knew, And all this 1/3 of the world population, if they had just the perfect home life, perfect medical history, everything else was perfect, we corrected for all of it, we would also know that they've had more cortisol going through their body than the other 2/3 of the world population during the neurodevelopmental timeline. Would y'all agree with that? Okay. Cortisol in your brain are not friends. You don't want cortisol in there very long, if at all, in most cases, unless in certain situations you might. But cortisol, being a stress hormone, degrades the connections between neurons. It makes literally like your dendrites, it kills them off. Just like a hedge clipper. Okay. Now, if you do that while the bush is still growing, in other words, the frontal lobe, during development, it modifies, just like with a tree, it modifies the shape of that tree. Would y'all agree with that? Yeah. That is where, in my opinion, we get things like ADHD for the high intelligence people. Except these folks are highly intelligent, and so they compensate, kind of skim the surface. And a lot of times, sometimes you'll see the bottom drop out in high school sometimes, but most of the time it's not until adulthood. Because that's when the world stops caring, basically. Right? You move out, you lose your surrogate frontal lobe, your parent. And so you're like, yeah, I'm 18, sure I can move across country and live by myself for the first time ever. Like, oh. But then you meet responsibilities that may or may not be healthy. That's my argument also, by the way. But we're forced into like expectations that may or may not be healthy. And when we can't do them, that's when a lot of symptoms will start to emerge for the first time ever, especially with ADHD and high IQ. So you think about the major milestones. Well, I was doing great until college, or I was doing great until I got my first job, had to show up at work consistently at 8 a.m., right? I was doing great until I got married, doing great until I had kids. Man, if you make it all the way there and never had any symptoms, they got you with those kids.
That's what I
Telling
was gonna say when you first said, like,
you ain't
when
making it past that checkpoint.
yeah, with when you said that you see so many women, I was like, it's because they get to that stage of life and then they're like, all right, here are all my ADHD.
But
Yeah,
they don't
well,
sleep
and
after kids. No sleep. Your sleep is completely changed
uh-huh,
once you have kids.
your whole biology has changed after having kids. And I'm here to tell you, if a woman reports having postpartum depression, I'm almost certain that they have ADHD. I say almost certain. I'm not 100% certain, but I'm almost certain. But when I say they have ADHD, what I mean by that is they're in that 1/3 of the world population. So I'm not blaming it all on ADHD, nor am I diagnosing everybody with ADHD. I'm telling you that does not exist. ADHD does not exist. We have described it incorrectly and then blamed it on the people suffering. Yeah. I wish I wish the world cared about that. As true as that is, and I would say it in court, but the world is not there yet. It's getting there. That's why I'm educating you guys. But the world doesn't care. You still have to pay your bills. I promise you, they will repo a car. You will get kicked out of your house. All kinds of terrible stuff will happen. You can't meet the world's expectations in the same way the rest of the 2/3 of the world, apparently have the right genetics to do it easier. But the world doesn't care about that science yet. And it should, because it might not be that we need additional Adderall. It may not be that we need all these treatments for things that are broken because we're trying to force ourselves into a system that's broken for at least 1/3 of us. feel like I'm preaching. I'm sorry, guys. You came here like, well, that's wonderful, but doctor, I still have to use the DSM-5 to diagnose. So do I. I get it. But I want you to be able to have an advanced understanding of that thing and beyond just like, okay, they meet all this criteria. What a silly, like, yeah, yes or no. When you make a diagnosis, I hope that you always ensure that they meet the diagnostic criteria, because if they don't, practically, you could get sued for malpractice. You're just making stuff up, right? So practically, you got to know that thing. Clinically, you can have it memorized, and it's not going to be all that helpful. Does that make sense? Yeah. So there's a practical component to knowing it. I'm just telling you anecdotally and in large part anecdotally, but I've evaluated 25,300 something people at this point. That's a lot of people. It's like my hometown of Paris. Might have been my hometown of Paris as it turns out, but that's a lot of people, and you're going to gain some once you get that like experience down. You'll see there's a commonality, a common thread or a pattern that emerges that implies that this stuff is interconnected and not a discrete categorical thing. It really isn't. You'd be like, how come every single one of my patients with depression also sure sounds a lot like my patients with generalized anxiety disorder? It's because they're not, we just made it up that they're different. They just made that up. They're not different. The same part, the same thing in the brain. In fact, it actually benefits big pharma to have different designations because they can make more money that way.
How do you
Yes.
diagnose? And do you diagnose with your DSM-5, or do you diagnose with a survey or just listening to their story? How do you do that? That's tricky then.
So as a diagnostician, what I rely on are my observations of that of my patient, right? That are supposed to be objective. I know they're biased, but like just my observations. Then I also rely on their history and their subjective reports. So like you'll know when somebody comes in and has memorized like the ADHD, they're like, well, I've had difficulty paying attention for more days than not for greater than 6 months. You're just like, that's real specific. How do you, that's really good keeping track of that to have ADHD, by the way. I'd be like, no way. Anybody with ADHD is keeping track of that. But so we're going to use our subjective report lightly on top of observations, on top of other evidence that we might be able to accumulate. That's where psychiatrists like to, some of them like to demand like to a 60-year-old, go bring me your high school transcripts. I had a 60-year-old patient with suspected ADHD that the doctor sent them to me because they couldn't track down their high school transcripts for their, their grades or whatever it was. It's like, man, don't do that. But if that information is available, we're going to use the outside evidence as well. You put all that together into a pot, you mix it up and see if any of those, if it tastes, in other words, if it matches any of the designated DSM-5 diagnostic criteria. And as you now know, a lot of those symptoms overlap with a bunch of different stuff, which is why the DSM has the differential diagnosis section in it. And you can see the APA just losing its mind trying to put that puzzle piece together so that you can have something sometimes, but you can't have something other times, but you can be comorbid with that and this and that. They are scrambling. That's why I recommended reading that section, by the way, is because you're going to read it and be like, it doesn't make sense. I feel confused after reading through it. You should feel less confused after reading through that. Wouldn't you agree? Right. It's a different, like, I want to arrive at an answer, but I'm walking away going like, are y'all sure? Y'all thought through this?
There's one
doesn't make
that we
sense.
read.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
There's one that we read, and it had a comorbidity, and it was in both sections. So it's like you can have this, if you have this, but you can't have that together with that. So it's like,
I love.
wait, I mean, it's literally like 2 pages apart. So
So
it's like you
sometimes
can't have it, but you can.
I love it when attorneys figure stuff out like that. Oh, I love it, because you want to see an attorney like lose their marbles in court, is they will make that point and the expert will just be like, well, yeah. And like you get like steams coming out of their face, and like it's like, I'm living in crazy town. So like, yeah, it is contradictory because there's a lot of just things that are made up in there. And I know I keep harping on that. I don't mean to highlight that as much. I just need you to, I want you as clinicians, future clinicians, to be able to navigate the diagnostic piece with a realistic perspective there. Because what I hear a whole lot, not just from counselors, even other psychologists and psychiatrists for that matter, is a whole lot of like rigid thinking of like, well, you provided ERP or whatever it is, therapy for generalized anxiety disorder. I thought it was you could only do CBT. Like, that's being too rigid. And you're going to get real bent out of shape about, or I say you will, I did initially, about getting exactly perfectly accurate diagnostically. But the reason why it's so hard is because it's not a system that makes sense. Okay. And it's okay if you feel a bit confused, because it's a system that confuses itself. You're driving on a map that has changed directions on you several times over the years. On top of that, you're going the wrong direction on some of those routes. Okay. How does that affect you clinically? Well, I'm real passionate about this because I'm seeing a lot of, especially like late teens, early 20s, and 30s, I would say, for the most part, who have latched on to social media labels, like things like ADHD and autism, and the autism ADHD combination, and all kinds of different things, and are beginning to find a lot of their identity in these labels. And so that's kind of what sparked my curiosity there, start digging a little bit further. And that matters because I'm telling you, it's hard for us as professionals with license, and you will be at some point, to be the gatekeeper for these labels. When somebody has already convinced themselves and has explained so much of their life, and then they come to you saying, hey, okay, this is all the resources I gathered for autism. Why I think I have autism. Here you go. I need you to tell me I have autism, though. So you're going to go back in your DSM-5. You're going to go, okay, well, but is this really autism? Or is this, because some of the things you're saying don't really match with that. That sounds more like ADHD. Well, but some of it sounds like OCD to me. And your intelligence is high, or like you will lose your mind trying to figure that out. But we need to help these folks because they don't know that there's not a whole bunch of good solid science that has been behind these labels. And I'm worried that there's going to be a whole generation of folks that are attached to something that ultimately predicts itself or produces itself. I don't want to take meaning away from anybody, but I also don't want, the prevalence rate for ADHD to be 50% in 10 years, simply because we're going to expand this definition out further and further without ever questioning, maybe the world's not exactly quite right. Yeah. I know I've been talking a lot. You guys are like, what's this guy like manic? I'm not manic, I promise. I just get excited about this stuff. Because it's the final frontier, really, in science, the brain is. And you're going to have the power to take this information and empower a whole bunch of people. Yeah. But it's going to have to start with you being able to dissect yourself or dissect things like the DSM-5 and know that they've got some of that stuff correct. It's just they took a wrong turn somewhere. Okay. I am going to wrap this up there for tonight, though, because it's been a long day. I've worked since 9 a.m. this morning. Yeah. That's not too bad, right? I'm hanging, like, if you wouldn't think, like, he said 12-hour day. Only because I'm a little bit too chatty Cathy. Okay. That's what happens to me when I
It's
start
really
getting
good
tired.
stuff, Dr. Armstrong. It's really good stuff, and I think we all really appreciate it. So thank you.
Well, thank you guys for listening. I am excited because I do see a generation of counselors, especially in the past couple of years, even, who are becoming disillusioned with some of old medicine's approach to this. And so I am seeing the product of that show up in their clients every now and then. I see them understanding, like, hey, ADHD, whatever, I'm having trouble right now. Like, how do I fix this difficulty? It's a more dimensional aspect or approach or concept versus like you either do or you don't have something. Yeah. I think the dimensional approach is really where it's at. Psychiatry just doesn't like it. Actually, it's not psychiatry. Big Pharma doesn't like it because then it invalidates the science behind of why we prescribe Prozac for, generalized anxiety disorder, but it's not FDA approved for depression or whatever it is. Yeah, it is approved for depression. I was trying to use an example, but that was a bad example. All right, for real this time, I'm gonna wrap this up. Thank you guys for listening. Y'all have a wonderful week, and I will see y'all next week, and hopefully have. I'm really trying for those videos. I promise I am. Okay.
Thanks so much.
For sure. Y'all have a good night.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye bye.